Here we go. So, welcome back to another episode of Preparing the Unprepared. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Nate Nichols, who's actually the chief scientist at Narrative Science. Nate picked up his PhD in 2010 from the Intelligent Information Laboratory in Northwestern University. And since then, he's worked at Narrative Sciences. He's been building all of the earlier versions of the authoring engine as a principal engineer before moving into a product architect role, and is now, as I mentioned, the chief scientist. So my relationship started with Nate about a few weeks ago, really. And I basically caught the tail end of a podcast that he did with Bernard Marr. And what stood out most to me after speaking with Nate is his motivation to create a social presence on LinkedIn. And at the time saw this opportunity to network and build that network. So I thought, okay, this is probably a really good topic to touch on. And I guess since then, he's been showing up really regularly on my weekly newsfeed. So with that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to the show, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lewis. Thanks everybody for watching today or whenever you're seeing this.
Absolutely. So today, some of the specific topics that I wanted to cover with Nate are firstly, his background and kind of journey in tech. Secondly, technical versus non-technical conversations and why there seemingly is such a divide. Then I'm hoping to go through some real life examples of where soft skills have brought value to Nate in his technical career. And then in an ideal world, we'll go through some of the best practices and things that we can do and use to try and improve and advance our soft skills in tech. So during the conversation, we'll be taking questions as always. So if anything springs to mind, or there's anything you want to ask myself or Nate, feel free to ping them across, and we'll bring them up on the screen as we go.
Yeah, please.
Cool. Sound good?
I'm in.
Perfect. All right. So I guess, look, why don't we start? I briefly introduced you, touched on your PhD and kind of your time spent at Narrative Science. Why don't you kind of talk us through that journey?
Yeah, for sure. So, growing up, I was into programming. I programmed on TI-83 calculators and sort of had that traditional kind of, or pretty common, like middle school, high schooler getting into Python and that kind of stuff. Went to college and went to a liberal arts school called DePauw in Indiana, which is a really great small liberal arts school, which was a great fit for me. Sort of the liberal arts side has been important to me as we talk about with soft skills. And from there, I got undergrad in computer science, went to get my PhD at Northwestern. And the whole plan for me was always to become a professor, actually, like a teaching professor. I liked doing the research. Yeah, but it was really like I wanted to be a liberal arts professor. That was sort of where I saw myself. I like teaching classes. I like coming up with curricula and working with students. And so I pursued that job or that career for 6-9 months. I was trying to get a faculty position at Medill, the journalism school at Northwestern. So they were hiring, this was 2010. So they were trying to bring in more technical people to make sure that their journalism graduates were, prepped to be successful in sort of writing on the internet, which was still a newish thing in 2010. And some of my research had been in that kind of news, computer science, AI space. And so I was trying to get that job a long time, taught some classes over at Medill, was all ready to get it, worked really hard, gave talks and met professors, did all that good stuff, and then got the job or got offered the job, but like 2 days before I'd started at Narrative Science. And the plan was to work at Narrative Science for the summer for like 8 weeks as a consultant, and then start at Northwestern as a professor in the fall. And those like 2 or 3 days had been enough for me. And then I was like, oh, I finally got this job. I've been, dreaming about this like tenure track faculty position. I was super lucky to get it, or be offered it. And it was really exciting. And I was like, but man, those 3 days at Narrative Science, I think were even more exciting. And the reasoning was sort of like, well, I can be in industry now. And if I want to be a professor later, I can sort of go that direction more easily than trying to be a professor now and then go into industry. Especially like when Narrative Science, it was the company had been formed like 3 months earlier, and it was so clear to me that it was just going to be a really exciting place to work, and I liked everybody I'd met in that time, and so I stayed. And like you mentioned, I spent about the first 5 years as an engineer, working in particular on our authoring engine, like the really sort of the little bit in the sort of heart of some of our earlier software that wrote stories, and there's all the data management and admin and pipelining and all this kind of real stuff around it. But I got to work on that little the actual kind of authoring engine part. And then as my sort of career developed and we brought in a bunch more engineers that were great and had a more, it just sort of became clear to me that my career path was not going to be becoming more and more like technical person. I liked programming. I was solid at it then. I'm probably not anymore. It's been a while, but I really like that actual sort of like building stuff. But what the company needed, and really kind of where I spike harder, is it's more on the product side. It's more on the future looking side. It's more like on aligning everybody within the company and outside the company around what we're trying to do. That sort of, that more kind of communication, that side. And so I shifted, sort of gradually went from being a real engineer to being sort of part-time engineer, part-time product manager, to product manager, to now in this chief scientist role. So it's been a pretty gradual process, but it's been nice for me. Like you said, I've been in neuroscience for 10 and a half years now, which is a really long time to be at any job now, especially the one real job I've had, especially coming out of grad school. But for me, the jobs I've done at neuroscience feel different, and the way the company has grown and changed feels different, and the people that have come and gone feel different. And so it doesn't feel like I've not at all been like treading water or sort of banging my head against the same problem, where there's a ton of progress being made and different positions that I've been lucky to move around between.
Yeah, something to be said for that. It's not common to see anyone in this space really spending that much time at any one business anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's nice. Like, I think it gives me credibility when I say I really believe in what we're doing in neuroscience. I really think this problem is worth solving. We're really working with great people, both customers and other employees. It's like I'm living proof of that. I continue to choose to be at neuroscience, and that's been an easy choice for me. And so I think my enthusiasm for the company and the work we're doing, I think is pretty convincing, because I've put in the time.
Yeah. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the specifics of what you guys are doing at Narrative Sciences, but there was one particular area that you were focused on, or at least a conversation that happened recently that seems to be very fitting, being that it's Masters Week. I think Brendan Morley, I think he's a project manager of some sort of the PGA Tour, he spoke with your VP of Sales, Matthew Bramson, about how they use data storytelling on the PGA Tour to engage with the audience. With that in mind, and I'm a golfer, so that's why I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
What is it that, just as a brief overview, that narrative science actually does?
Yeah, so we've been sort of doing the same thing for the last 10 years in different technologies and different iterations, but it's all around this idea of automated data storytelling. And so, data storytelling is telling stories with data, and they're not stories with like woodland creatures or sort of novels, but they're write-ups of what's happening, about why a number changed, what caused that, what's likely to happen in the future. It's a real sort of construction. It's a thing that people can wrap their arms around. And so we do that, and it's automated because it's our software actually doing that work. It's doing the analysis. It's figuring out how to lay out the story. It's writing it out in English or in language. And so we do that in a couple different ways. Our main focus now is on a product called Lexio, which does this for BI. So instead of having expecting your employees to come in and click around in dashboards like Tableau, you can instead have your less technical employees in particular. They can just read stories to figure out what they need to understand and what they need to know. And then we've also got things like PGA Tour. We write 500,000 Little League game recaps every year. We do some financial services reporting, and all of that is around. It's a little more custom work that we've done, but it's writing stories about the golf tournaments. It's writing Little League game recaps about how the Tiny Titans defeated the Small Sluggers 6-4 in this game Saturday afternoon at a local park somewhere. But it's the same idea. There's data gathered by parents at Little League games. There's obviously a ton of data gathered, on the golf tournament, and all of that gets fed into one of our pieces of software, and then that writes these really natural human-sounding stories. And I know for customers like PGA Tour, they're really excited about it because it's an AI, so it can kind of scale however you need it to scale, right? You don't need to hire a team, an army of golf sports writers to come up and write up these different recaps. You can have an AI do that, and you can give different experiences to your golf fans or to your sports fans or whomever.
Yeah. How do you humanize something like that? How do you make it actually feel like a human's wrote that particular story?
Yeah, so this was I remember like now, in 2020, there's AI is sort of big enough that people, when we talk about the company, people are like, that sounds awesome. And you kind of believe it's real, right? And in 2010, we had to convince people that it wasn't like we didn't have a bunch of offshore people that wrote all these stories real quick. It's like, no, it's the software. That's how it does it in a second. There's no way to farm that out. But for us, it's working a lot with customers, and it's trying to figure, for things like PGA Tour, we work with customers to figure out, what's most important to their audience, what's most relevant, what's really going to sort of move the needle for what they want to do. But in general, it's thinking about, it's thinking about like there's lots of different products now that will give you like a very data-driven answer. You can say, how many deals did we close last week? And that gets converted into a database query, and the answer comes back and say it's 42. And for us, we always try to go a step beyond that and think about how a person would actually, characterize or assess some situation. There's a more qualitative aspect to it where if a human would say like, oh, we did really well last week, I think there's like 40 deals, which is more than we've done so far, and I think next week's going to be even better. And that's the kind of answer like a human would give. And there's a lot more context in that. There's more of that sort of future and back looking. And so when we're trying to write stories that resonate with people, we do a lot of those same things. And so we always try to go just, beyond the raw numbers or beyond the direct question was asked, and to give a more, sort of more cohesive, well-rounded answer, the kind of or story, the kinds of things that a sports writer would do, or a financial reporter or a business analyst would do.
Yeah, and I assume you're using some form of natural language to support that.
Yeah. So we do a lot of it's natural language generation. It's called NLG. So a lot of what our software is doing is it's working really hard to figure out what it should be saying and where that should go in the story. And then once it's got that pretty detailed outline of what the system wants to say, then it actually converts that to language. And we've gone through a few different iterations and sort of methods of doing this kind of NLG. There's I'm sure a lot of people on the or listening in today are watching. I've heard of like GPT-3. So there's a lot of excitement now around NLP and NLG, and those approaches are using it's a deep learning based model. It's a very bottoms up model. They're super impressive and awesome and exactly right for for use cases where Google or OpenAI is trying to provide value. And for us, we use a more structured approach, so we can actually guarantee that our numbers are right and that our sentences are going to be grammatical. And so it's not that sort of thing where it's like, hey, you should trust us with your business data, and our stories are like 80 to 90% accurate. That doesn't fly for what we're trying to do. So we take a different approach than some of the new things coming out.
Makes sense. I appreciate the overview. Going to bring it back to the topic in hand.
Yeah.
So, Nate, you strike me as someone who's pretty confident, pretty comfortable having these kind of conversations. Obviously, you've been much more proactive on social over the last few months. Is that something that comes naturally to you, or is that something that you've kind of developed over time?
No, it's not. It doesn't come at all naturally to me. I was actually going to say when you said you seem confident, I was like, just so everybody knows watching, I am not at all confident doing these things. And I want you to know that, so to understand that you could be doing these things too if you're not confident. It is not like I've always in high school. I did a couple plays. I was in like the variety show, so I have some kind of like, performance background. I did improv on the side a little bit in Chicago, like nothing ever a career or serious, but I've been on stage a few times, but this, for me, a lot of I think a lot of sort of career growth for me has been is really kind of being more confident, filling the space that I've been provided and kind of, and trying to push on that space a little bit. And it's hard, and it's definitely a process. I was nervous about this call. I mean, the last 20 minutes, like before this started, I was like, oh, I'm talking to Lewis, it's going to be good. And, Lewis, we talked before, and it was like a lovely conversation. I know you're a chill dude. I'm sure the audience is great. And like, but yeah, these kind of things are not really super comfortable for me, but they're definitely getting better as well. And like you mentioned, writing on LinkedIn and posting there, it's been really nice. I've been trying to post a few times a week, and really trying to, just to write things that are interesting to people, are useful to people. And it's been going well, and it's really nice. It's been, especially with quarantine and elections and everything that's been happening here, it's been nice to sort of feel those connections to people, and sort of, have the little back and forth in the comments or on the messages, and sort of to be pushing myself there, and sort of feeling growth there has been nice over the last couple months.
Nice. So I'm gonna ask you something here. Talk to me about the dinosaur outfit. I know you're feeling confident, Nate, but I didn't see you in a pair of leggings.
No. My wife and I, we're very like not crafty people at all. We're just sort of not good at the crafts and the holiday decorations and that kind of thing. Except for we do Halloween. We do bad Halloween costumes for our kids with it's all felt and hot glue. There wasn't like a lick of stitching on there. But
hopefully not while he was wearing it. You didn't put it together while he putting hot glue on it.
We've been watching a lot of old seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, and I definitely identify with some of the things they're doing to like get out on the runway. We're just hot gluing it on. It's like, that's what we're doing too.
Brilliant. Well, I think what I noticed from your post is you really wasn't. You haven't been talking about stuff you don't know, and I feel like confidence is helped if you approach topics that you're comfortable discussing. I started these podcasts, and I definitely tried to go way too deep technically initially, and like I'm still nervous about doing these now, and people might think, oh, well, you're a recruiter, so you must be comfortable in front. Like I'm talking to someone right now with a PhD who is very, very involved in data science. Like, there's definitely a divide between your level of understanding, skill, and knowledge and mine. But I tend to try and stick within what I know, and sometimes push the boundaries. I think that really helps me with confidence. But when I see your posts, like, you're just talking about stuff that's on your mind that clearly you know a lot about. You tend not to kind of just go into a realm that you're completely out of your depth in. Maybe you do. Maybe I've missed that.
Yeah. No, I think that like one of the nice things for me is that I realize I sort of know more than I thought I did. Like, it doesn't, if you just list all the things like you'll miss a lot of things, right? If you just sort of think about, what do I know? I know some dates, I know some people, but then you start kind of getting into these posts, or you think about, for me, a lot of my posts sort of like, what's something that happened in the past that has kind of stuck with me? Some conversation, something somebody said, some like meeting that went well or didn't, and for whatever reason, it's kind of stuck in my mind, and trying to kind of like pull at that and see why it's stuck there. And what's usually happens is like, oh, I have kind of like a theory about this, or I can generalize this a little bit, or this is a little more abstract than I thought it was. And so it's sort of like a refining process. It's sort of, I don't know, manufacturing well, but it feels like sort of there's like a mining process, there's like a refining process in there, and it's sort of, you come away feeling more confident, where it's like, it's like, well, we're talking, I'll have some answers here that I feel good about. It's like, I didn't realize I knew that, but Lewis asked the question, I have a pretty good answer for it. And it's, and this is not, specific to me, this is you, and this is everybody watching. And so I think that sort of act of trying to put things out in the world is nice, because it forces you to I think better appreciate the things you already know, and the value you have to add. I always like, when I read biographies or self-help books, there's all these like anecdotes people rattle off, these big, meaningful conversations they had 10 years ago that changed their life, or all these things. And it's like, I don't have any of these, man. A couple of months ago, I was like, I don't know, like we talked about, my career has gone well. I'm happy, and I'm sort of moving forward in life. But I didn't feel like I had that sort of like library of experiences that I could pull out at the right time. Here's a great example of time I was wrong, and here's a time I helped somebody. But as you sort of start writing, you kind of find those, and I can feel myself starting to kind of build out, little anecdotes or stories or life lessons or whatever you want to call them. So for me, it's been useful to understand and appreciate what I know already.
So just on that note, what books are you reading? What would you recommend people have a quick look at?
I should have a better answer here. This is one of my not so secret shames now. I'm really bad at reading books. It doesn't. Yeah, I'm bad at reading books. I used to have a commute and I read pretty well. I don't now. So I haven't figured out where books fit into my life very well. I just read The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Horowitz. Yeah, it was a really good book. It was a good sort of all about his experience coming up and being CEO and a bunch of tough decisions he made and how they got through it. But I should have more books here, Lewis, but I don't really.
Do you have any podcasts that you follow or any audio books that you listen to? We should have planned these questions, right?
Yeah. So another thing that I don't really know how to fit in my life yet is podcasts. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, I heard a really good one recently that got me all fired up more about speaking and sort of taking, to make this maybe somewhat relevant to the soft skills discussion. It was a guy that was basically a public speaker talking about how you get successful at public speaking, and in particular how you get more gigs and sort of keep getting booked if you want to be like a professional keynote speaker, and that's sort of your day job. Like how do you set that up? And that was super interesting. And for me, there was a good when I think about soft skills, it's really funny when you're talking about that. You're talking to me who's got like a PhD. Like in my head, thinking about this coming on, I was like, okay, like I'm going to talk to Lewis. He was cool, but he just does this talking stuff all the time, right? He's like a recruiter. He's slick. He's charming. He'll be fine. He's going to be all cool guy about it. And then I'm going to be here trying to figure out what I want to say. And it's a total it's a great example of everybody's sort of jealous of what the other person has. Grass is always greener sort of thing. And, there's sort of like, I'm kind of more hard skill. You're kind of more soft skill or roles or whatever. And for me, that podcast about speaking was super influential because it was clear how much the guy is like thinking about how to be a speaker and like really optimizing that process and when you're sort of running experiments and what you're looking for from the audience before you keep iterating. And it was just such a rigorous process that he was going through. That it was a good reminder for me that like I think growing up I had this idea that like there's me. I was kind of a mathy, computer sciencey, programming kid, and I was smart. My friends were smart. We're all kind of mathy, nerdy types. And then there was like the kids that were charming and charismatic and slick and confident. And it was this idea that like we're doing the hard skills. We're like building stuff. And then there's going to be some other guy that comes in, he kind of sells it or he has to like market it. And like, you probably need those guys, but we're kind of like really doing like the real work here. And it's just chip on my shoulder, I guess. I mean, for me, it was this like the first time I started talking to sales and marketing people in narrative science, it was like, oh my God, you guys are really smart. You work really hard. You have these like really detailed plans and you follow them and you experiment, you try things. And if it works, you tell other people to try it. And if it doesn't, you try to figure out why it doesn't work. And it was just as much like rigor as we had on the engineering side, even though it was all sort of in this like soft skill area. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a good reminder that it's not like soft skills are not this thing that you're born with or not. And you're sort of, hey, congratulations, you're charismatic and good looking, you spike on soft skills and you just coast through life. It's really not that. The people on this kind of softer sides are, if they're good, they're working just as hard and just as rigorously. And it's a real thing. They're muscles you get better at. I've gotten better at them, certainly. And so they're really more peers, I think, and sort of equally worthy of focus and effort and improvement, which was not my understanding sort of growing when I was growing up or earlier in my career.
Two really good points I took from that. First one is how different is business over school? You still have those divides, right? You still got that kind of like nerdy side where people are focused on the hard stuff, and then you've got the slicks who are focused on the sales side or the business side. Yeah. And actually one of the biggest challenges in a lot of companies that seem to fail, or at least the ones that are successful have got it right, is like bridging that divide.
Yeah.
Figuring out a way to have that communication channel working. And one of the first steps people can take in tech is start to become a little bit more kind of product minded. So I guess absolutely. With that in mind, like how soon is too soon to start thinking about soft skills?
If
you're a tech person.
I think it's never too soon to start doing that. Like for me, I think there can be an idea for, if you're an engineer, this was certainly when I started as an engineer. And I think now for people coming in as data scientists or analysts, like your job is to like build something, and then people will do things with that. On the engineering side, product tells you what to build. They talk to customers, they do all that kind of stuff. Product tells you what to build. Your job is to build that, and then product takes that and gives it to customers and something happens. Or, and the same thing with like your job is to build something and then salespeople go out and sell it, or marketing people go out and market it. And it's really, I think that is like a really sort of limiting and self-defeating view for people on engineering, data scientists, analysts, those kind of folks to take. And the view I really want people to have, and the view that's been super successful at narrative science over the last couple of years, is when we've sort of rounded the corner here. But it's really taking ownership of that entire process, right? And when you're an analyst, it's not your job to build a dashboard or to remove duplicates from the database or to clean up addresses or sort of that kind of, you have to do those tasks. But really what you're solving for is the organization getting value from that data, right? And so your job isn't done when it shows up in a dashboard. You really need to and be caring about that the data is impacting decisions, that the data is impacting people's understanding, that value is actually coming out of that data. And the same for an engineer. I used to be really happy when it's like, hey, I completed that 8-point task in Jira. I got it done on Friday afternoon. It got merged. Like, I'm good. And the view we're taking now, and all our engineers are doing this because they're great, is that no, they want that feature to be done, and then it gets tested, and then it gets documented, and then it gets released to customers, and then customers start using it, and then we iterate on it, and then customers love it. And that's when that task is done for engineers. And it's really caring about that whole process, and not, don't sort of see yourself as as a cog, right? You're really responsible for everything that comes out, and that whatever you're doing makes it all the way to actual value to your customers. And that's been a really a super valuable shift for us, where marketing and sales, called go-to-market, and the prod dev side is working super in sync now. And things that salespeople hear on calls become features that product people prioritize and work on with engineers. Engineers have a lot of say in the roadmap now because they know what's happening best in the actual system. And it's a much tighter, it's a much more cohesive sort of team, like you're saying, and it feels like one team. And for us, it's getting features to come out faster. The features are better. Customers like them more. We're closing more deals. The marketing's resonating better because it's really in sync with the product and the way we're selling it. And there's just a bunch of really positive things that come out of taking that sort of that bigger approach and caring about the entire process.
Yeah, I hear a lot of businesses often where their technical teams are building stuff that then they never actually make it into production. And I'm like, why? Why are you wasting so much time? Why is there not someone saying in the middle, like, this is what's realistic? First and foremost, you need to understand what the customer wants or what the business needs, right? So if you don't know that, how can you go and make something that's going to bring value? And I think it should be something that even the salespeople are thinking about. How can I gain some level of technical understanding? And vice versa. It's not just like, do tech people need to have soft skills? It's also people with soft skills need to understand what goes on the tech side.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of obviously everybody's figuring out how to work during COVID times and remote and all that. And one of the things we've learned that's been working well for us is creating they're kind of explainer videos for their internal. Hopefully we'll do some external versions of them eventually. But it's basically just a PowerPoint deck and, sort of voiceover and recording it, but it's targeted. They're 10 to 15 minutes long, and they're sort of more technical-ish brain dumps for marketing folks, for sales folks, for customer support folks. Like, not, they don't come out ready to be an engineer, but they come out with a better understanding of how the system works, of where it's going to go in the future, of why some things are really easy and why some things are really hard. And and it's sort of bulking up that hard skill side a little bit. And I think you're totally right. It's not like some people can be all soft skills and the rest of us have to be both hard and soft skills. It's that all of us need to have to have a foot in each camp, and the balance of that will shift, and that's totally okay and natural, but it should have at least sort of 20%, I think, on either foot.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm intrigued to, if you've got some, I know we perhaps haven't planned this one, get a couple of real life examples of where having that soft skill ability, or having that non-technical understanding or ability to translate something into a business conversation, where that's really brought value, and where if you didn't have that, it could have gone the complete opposite direction.
Yeah. I think there's probably two examples that come to mind. One is that we have a hackathon every 6 months. Everybody takes 2 days and form teams. It's pretty standard hackathon process. It's always, it's the two most exciting days of the year when you get to see, especially as our software has matured and we're able to build so much on top of like a real foundation already. It's super exciting to see the stuff that people can do. But there was one, as I've gone to the product side, I've become less, like I don't code much during the hackathons, and I'm more sort of, they kind of let me be on a team and I get to throw out ideas. But for a while with Lexio, which is our new BI experience, we didn't know quite how to talk about it for a while, because it writes stories. It's sort of like a BI tool, but it's all in stories, and it's kind of like hard to explain. And so, or it was at the time. And so the hackathon project was all around, can we turn this into a news feed, right? Like everybody likes Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Apple News. We all like those in the consumer world. What if you could just subscribe to your business and it would show up in some kind of like news feed experience? And so that was the idea we did for the hackathon. I was able to recruit like our foremost senior engineers, they just banged on it for 48 hours. So they built out the entire thing. It was like a fantastic demo. But my part of it was, sort of ideas, but then at the very end, like there's a demo, you demo it to the company, right? And typically, I think our hackathons are like a lot of hackathons where it's, you put together a few slides, you kind of introduce the team and talk about what you did, and maybe have some kind of funny memes on the slide, and everybody's in good spirits and having a beer and looking at the end of the hackathon. And for me, we didn't have slides up or anything, and I totally was like one of those things. It's like, I got to take a shot before I go give this talk. So I walked out and sort of did this like keynote. It was like a 2-minute keynote, but it was I saw a tape of it later, and you could hear my voice quavering and stuff. But the idea was, it was a very confident just declaration of, Lexio is the social news feed for your business. Every day Lexio wakes up, and it was really selling the hell out of it and trying to be just super confident, super declarative, pretending that people in the room weren't also all working on Lexio and knew what it was, and just sort of introduce it to that audience and try to make it feel like kind of a TED talk, kind of like, oh, this is a dude coming out and saying stuff. And it worked super well. And that's what the product is now, right? And it's a bunch more than that, but that's a big core component of the project is that it's a newsfeed for your business. And I think we would have got there anyways, but I think that sort of introduction and trying to paint that vision for people of, this isn't like a hackathon project. This is the future of the product. This is the future of the company. It's embodied here in this hackathon we threw together in the last 48 hours, but it was really kind of selling and presenting something bigger. And I think that, I think that was really influential for the company, and it was for the product and for the company. And I know it also was for me, sort of selfishly. I think it kind of leveled me up a bit in people's eyes. Like it's those kinds of, when you get a chance to talk to the company of, we have all hands every month, and there's a lot of people that, our CEO always speaks and our president always speaks. But there's also a lot of kind of, somebody runs a small project and they present that, or kind of more junior people get a chance to do that. And I just really encourage people to take advantages of those kinds of things where your company is giving you an audience. You can do a lot with that. And it's a real confidence moment. You have to kind of suck it up and go for it. But it's a way better idea to go for it. And people will appreciate that. People will notice that, and it will get you, it'll get you more attention within the company when you sort of come out swinging like that.
I don't think it gets, even though all of these guys and girls in the audience as well, I don't think that makes it any easier.
No, I think it makes it harder in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's like, I know it's Anna and Nick, and like,
Yeah.
I'm looking for their reactions, and I know I'm going to get feedback from afterwards, which is great. You want feedback, but it's also like, if this were just a room full of strangers, I would say all this, walk away, and never see any of you again, which is not obviously what you actually want to do, but it can be kind of tempting when you're standing up on a stage.
Yeah, I remember doing my first ever meetup, actually hosting it. We put it all together. We invited everyone. We had about 100 attendees in the Flatiron in New York City, and nice. We just, I mean, I feel sick thinking about it. I remember going up and they're like, it's showtime. I'm like, I had to walk between everybody. The cameras were on. It was streaming live, and I had this piece of paper, and I almost threw it over my shoulder. I was shaking so much. So there's certain tips that helped in those situations. Like for me, now if I've got something to read, a cue card, if there's something I just want to just kind of prompt me, I don't hold it. Because as soon as you see yourself shaking, it makes you more nervous because you're like, oh my God, everyone else can see this.
Yeah.
Second tip was don't wear grey. Grey is the worst color you can wear.
Really?
Because as soon as you see yourself sweating, it's like, oh my God, I'm sweating. And then your shirt goes a different color. So you get even more nervous. So there was like little things that I learned and picked up that I was just like, okay, if you're not holding something and you kind of keep your hands together like this, it stops them shaking. Try not to do this while you're talking.
Yeah. I hope anybody watching this that like looks up to us at all, or is like, oh, I'd kind of like a career like one of us, understands that. Yeah, this stuff is like super hard. I had a red shirt on, and then I put a red hoodie on, and I was like, I know I'm going to get hot because I always get hot in these kind of conversations. So I'm going to take off my hoodie halfway through, and I don't want to take off a red hoodie and put on have a red shirt underneath. So I'm going to change my shirt real quick. It's just like, it's the stupidest stuff, and checking your hair and just all these silly things that it's really.
It makes you nervous though, because all of this, like I've learned now that doing these podcasts, I'm like, I'm not going to log in 15 minutes before. I saw you drop me a message and be like, where are you? I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not logging in 10 minutes before because it'll make me nervous.
I know. I was like, I'm going to get on there at 9:30. I was like, dude, what are you going to do for 30 minutes? Just like sit there and be anxious. Like, go play with your kid and come on a few minutes early.
But then you're like this. You're like, oh my God, that was only 5 minutes. I've still got. Yeah. I feel like there's certain little things you can do that help with those situations. And then, let's not shy away from the fact that at the end of it, when you do it, and whether you nail it or not, there's a feeling at the end that's like euphoric. That really, it does. By the way, it doesn't necessarily make the next one easier.
No.
But it definitely is a fantastic feeling. And if you're able to get those soft skills down, I really do think it can make a massive impact on anything you do.
Yeah, like just another example of that. I do different, like part of my job now is I work with the actual engineering and product teams to talk about where we're going, to agree and align on where we're going, to make sure that we're like the stuff we're building this week and this month is aligned to where we want to be 6 months from now. Some of what I do is conversations like this and writing, and some of what I do is I'm pulling together like a memo now for our CEO of how Lexio works, so we can have more conversations. We can share that with potential partners and all that kind of good stuff. And our CEO is lovely. I've sort of worked indirectly for him for 10 years. He's a great guy. We don't work together very often. I don't sort of exactly know what his like working style is. I didn't quite know what he was looking for this memo. And for me, like a couple of years ago, it would have been like, okay, like CEO is asking me to do something. I want to go off. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get it all together, like really nice and all packaged up, and give it to him. And he's going to be like, wow, Nate, this is great. This is exactly what I was looking for. And I'm going to high five myself and leave. And that never is what happened, right? You get to the end. He was like, oh, I was thinking this. And it's like, well, shit, I put a week into it. I wish I had known that earlier, or you could have told me sooner, or like, oh, I didn't realize you wanted to be that technical, and around and around. And so this time I was very good about, I put a half hour into it as a PowerPoint deck, and I said, hey, this is kind of how it's going. Is this what you're thinking? And he was like, oh no, I was thinking like a written memo, and we don't need a video of it. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, so then I outlined the whole thing, which took about another hour, and gave it to him. And he was like, yeah, that's looking kind of right. Make sure to look for this. And then I wrote the first couple of pages and gave it to him. And he's like, yep, that's exactly what I want. Just finish it. And it was it was just this, it was like, for me, it was like, I did this way better than I would have a couple of years ago because I've been intentionally working on, project management and transparency into what I'm working on and getting feedback earlier and tighter iterations and doing things cheaply instead of writing a whole doc and then getting feedback on it. And so and it felt really good. Like I got the Slack from him last night. He's like, yeah, so I'm looking forward to, kind of finishing out. I was like, yeah, this is like amazing. And it was such a small thing, but it really felt good. And it feels good when you kind of, just like when you're programming or you're trying to solve some data analysis problem, you sort of crack the nut and you still got to clean up the code. You still got to add comments. You got to do whatever. But like the light bulb happened and you locked onto it. And that you can still get that on the soft skill side when you're trying to write a LinkedIn post and it clicks for you and you're like, oh, sweet. Or you got a great hook to put at the beginning, or you figured out a nice way to close it out. Like it's the same kind of, the same kind of endorphins and euphoria, like you said, and that sense that you're building something and you're making progress and you're improving, that it's really satisfying. I agree.
Yeah. There's something to be said for you having got that experience a couple of years later. I think the clear thing that I noticed there was that you asked questions and you didn't just assume you knew what he wanted. And actually that is the breakdown between tech and non-tech in business.
Yes.
Tech teams assume. Yeah.
Well, no, I think it's like a lot of this for me is coming out of trying to become a better product manager and understanding how much of product is not, this is like one of the first things as you sort of start to get into product stuff, they'll tell you, but it's like the customer says, I want a big green button here. That doesn't mean go build a big green button there. It means that you try to figure out what problem they're trying to solve with the big green button and how that works in your system and how that works with your roadmap and all this other kind of stuff. And it's the same thing. If your CEO says, hey, I want a memo I can share with investors, don't just go off and try and build that based on your understanding of what that means. It's ask them questions, give them mock-ups, do it cheaply. Yeah, why? What are you solving for? What do you care about? What are the outcomes you're expecting in it for it? Who's the audience? What are they going to be looking for? Is there any sort of gotchas? What's the time frame? How should I weigh this against the other tasks to have on my plate? Like I used to be afraid of asking those questions, and you feel like you should know it already, or somebody else would know it, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, I honestly don't think there's any stupid questions. I had a really good chat with Vin Vashista. I'm not sure if you know Vin, but
I don't think so.
I'll connect you guys. He mentioned to me once that during an interview process that there was a situation where he was asked to explain something, and then he asked them to explain it back. And then he asked them to explain it to everyone else in the room to see if they were able to communicate what they were trying to get him to communicate.
Yeah.
To someone who was technical, non-technical, developer, researcher, because every single one of those explanations or questions might be different because they're going to answer it differently based on their background and experiences.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's no stupid questions. There really isn't. Actually, in fact, stupid is a strong word, but by not asking questions, you're almost being stupid because you end up wasting a week trying to build something that's not relevant.
Yeah, and you're being like it's like silent failure. No one knows that you should have asked a question, and so it can go on for a long time. And I there's been a lot of meetings where I've been in or something where the person that asked the question that can kind of feel basic. It's such like a power move, and they're like when somebody's like, "Why?" We just had a half-hour presentation on this feature and this new capabilities, and somebody's like, "Why are we doing this?" It's like, dude, that's it takes a bunch of confidence to answer that question, and you're going to want to see what the answer is. And it's like, dude, and it comes across as it's like power move. It's not like, oh, look at so-and-so, they're too dumb to know why we're doing this. It's like, they had the guts to say, why are we doing this? And it's like, good for you, junior engineer or senior engineer, whoever it is. It's like, that's a good question to be asking, a good thing to be pushing on.
It's a great telling point, because if you don't get an answer there, really, is it that important?
Dude. Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's the if you can't explain it in 30 seconds, you don't really understand it and that kind of stuff. And it's again, to keep going back to LinkedIn, when I first started writing on there, it's like there's like a 1,200 character limit, and I would open. I use Bayer as sort of like my drafting thing, and I'd write it, and then I'd be like, okay, this seems about right, and I'd paste it into LinkedIn. It's like, you're 1,000 characters over, dude. Yeah. So I check that all the time now, so I get tighter iteration about that. But it's like, you're saying too much, dude, and you cut out half of it, and it's like, none of this added any value. this is it's half as long as it was and twice as tight, and nothing was lost. And it's like really, it's a good exercise for me to get. I like writing, and I'm sort of academic, and it's easy to get me excited about big words or sort of defining things correctly, or like introducing new terms that have these really technical definitions. And it's sometimes you need that. Sometimes you got to be really rigorous and strict about what things are and exactly what attributes are on this model versus this other one. But lots of times that's not the right level of detail, like you've been saying.
Yeah. One of the most important places that I see soft skills being needed as well, especially in a marketplace that has such huge demand when you're applying for jobs, is when you're actually going through the interview process. There's a lot of time you might actually be interviewed by someone who isn't technical. You might have a chat with the CEO, you might have a chat with the COO, whoever it might be. And if you're not able to have these conversations on a non-technical level, it could be the difference between you securing a job and not. And it doesn't matter whether you're the right person for the job or not. If you're not able to explain that really can impact the opportunities that you pick up moving forward too.
Yeah, like we have a senior engineer on our side who's he's super strong technically, and he's a good communicator too. And I was talking to him recently and pushing him to set up time, like set up a regular sort of mentoring check-in time with our president or with our CEO, somebody more kind of senior on that side of the office. And it's like, you should be, he does a lot of our machine learning sort of data intelligence work, and it's like they're super interested in that in theory. They don't know, we don't have technical co-founders. They have really strong business and sales and marketing backgrounds, but they're really interested in what he's doing, and he should be able to explain what he's doing to them in a way that's interesting for them, that they can provide feedback on, they can kind of get their arms around it, so they can apply their intuitions about, they're not going to recommend an ML model to them or some algorithm, but they know, like, oh, like, how is this going to work if we want to go international next year? How would that change things? Or if we're going between enterprise and small business, like, does that matter? Like, I want him to have experience doing that, just for exactly what you're saying of people on the technical side. You're going to need to be selling yourself and what you've been doing to non-technical people, either because you're trying to get customers, or because you're trying to get promoted, or you're trying to get a new position, or you're trying to get visibility within the company, or you want to be tighter with sales so you can build better features. Like, you're going to need to have those relationships and ability to connect. And so, yeah, probably taking every chance you can to practice that is super useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, to kind of wrap this up then, Nate, what would your advice be to anyone right now who's maybe not feeling super confident to go out there and post or jump on a podcast or go and have that conversation? What would you suggest is a really good place to start building these soft skills?
Yeah, I think I would say probably two suggestions. One is I would just write stuff on LinkedIn. Like, for me, I'm not into social media. I don't do Facebook or any of these things. I kind of think they're bad for the world and for people. I'm kind of down on these. So when we started talking about doing LinkedIn, I was like, oh, I should have more of a presence there. I was like, okay, you got to kind of suck it up, dude. This is part of your job. You're not going to really like it, but you like writing, it'll be okay. But it's been really great. Like I've been talking about, and it's been really good for my thinking. And yeah, I think just that act of writing, and I didn't have anything to say when I started that, right? It was not like, oh man, I've got all these awesome ideas, I'm just going to kind of burn down this list. It was like, shit, what am I going to write about tomorrow? And I'm still in that mode, and I'm a couple days ahead. Typically, I've got like a short list of kind of ideas. But again, you don't need like a bunch of amazing experiences to write, and they're always going to be. Everybody's on a different stage of our journeys, right? And so I'm 10 years into my career. I'm 37 now. There's a bunch of people ahead of me, and there's a bunch of people behind. And so, one thing I've been trying to do is sort of what are things that I've learned or took me 10 years to learn that probably should not have taken 10 years, and how can I help accelerate that for other people? That kind of looking back at things you've learned and helping other people to learn them more quickly than you did is an evergreen topic that everyone can do, right? You can be in high school and write about things you'd wish you'd known in middle school, and be useful for people in middle school. Mm-hmm. There's probably not a lot of middle schoolers on LinkedIn, but that kind of thing that's been really useful to me. And again, like we've been talking about, there's nothing special about you or me, right? we're not fated to be successful or confident or good at public speaking or good at conversations like this or good at writing or anything. We have all the same insecurities that everybody else feels, and it's really just sort of about moving through them. And the other piece of advice I would have is, like particularly for people that are interested in the data side of things, because I think there can be, sort of this idea that you can get like a new data set and you kind of play with it. Like you look to see what kind of questions you could answer it or what you could do with it. And I think a really nice model instead is to find some data set and to think about like, what are the kinds of, like, imagine, sort of put yourself in the role of someone who would care about that data set. Think about the questions they would actually have this is just you as a business person, right? It's, if I run Biden's campaign, what kind of information would I have been looking at when I'm trying to decide whether to buy more TV ads in Minnesota? Or if I'm going to open an Indian restaurant, I've got a bunch of data here. I found a fun data set yesterday about Indian dishes and their ingredients and how long they take to prepare and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, you're opening an Indian restaurant, you're a restaurateur and chef, and you want to, right size the menu, not have too many ingredients, but also be able to have a wide variety of dishes. So what are the 10 ingredients you could carry that let you cook the most dishes or something? And starting with an actual business problem and then trying to work backwards to, oh, you actually need to figure that out in the data. But I think in the real world, everything starts with the business problem. And so even when you're sort of practicing or sort of learning, data science or analytics or building out new skills, to always start from a business problem like that and not start with a new algorithm you want to try out or a new fun data set you found or a new programming language you want to try. But this kind of practice always staying grounded in actually trying to solve a business problem. And again, making sure that you're not just delivering a number or a dashboard, but you really want to deliver better understanding and better actions because of what was in that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a good question come through here as well while we was
sure.
from Judy Desire. How do you know what you're writing or what you're posting is actually valuable?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And like intuitively, it tries to. So I would not worry a lot about valuableness. First of all, like if you, for me, I was trying to be like, what is the, you're not.
The world want to see.
Yeah, and it's not, you're not dying, and you've got 3 things to say to the world before you're gone. Like imagine. Just sort of put yourself in the mindset, you're going to write 1,000 posts, right? And so there's going to be ups and downs. Some of them are not going to really hit. There's going to be some real nuggets in there, but you don't know when those are going to come. So it's really sort of getting into the rhythm of it. I think is more important than solving for value in any particular one. But for me, it's would I have wanted to read this post in the past? Like, would this have been useful to me? Would I have been interested in this? Would I have bothered to read this post? Would I have sort of hit the read more to expand it, or would I have scrolled past? That's I sort of think of myself in the past because I should probably have a wider worldview and sort of more interesting or expansive notion of like my audience. But for me, I think about myself in a few years ago a lot, and just mechanically, my one sort of social media tip, I guess, very tactically, you're kind of looking for about 2% engagement on a post, right? Or that's what I've been told is like solid. So if you take the comments plus the likes divided by the views, if that's around 2%, then that was sort of like that post kind of works. And so I kind of roughly calculate that sometimes to see how they're doing. But that's kind of a rule of thumb, is something around 2% for your post. My
advice would be, don't measure yourself against someone like Gary V.
Yes.
You see Gary V and he's getting thousands of likes and lots of engagement. Here's the first thing, who is your audience to start with? You've got to figure out who that is and why are you trying to engage with them? Mm-hmm. Secondly, you don't always have to bring value. This is your feed, this is your article, this is your publication. Just do it for yourself in the short term. Yeah. And people will start to see value in it because they'll find it relatable. And consistency is so much. They're just seeing the same faces in your post over and over again. It makes there's a lot of people I see that I don't recognize that come by because they post, whenever there's a job posting every 6 months, their company, they'll pop up and say, hey, we're hiring. And I don't sort of track them at all. And there's other people that I don't really know them any better, really, but I feel like I do because they're always coming by, man. They've always got, something showing up. Absolutely. So yeah, you're right. Consistency is key. I don't think you always have to be bringing value. I think you just have to make sure you're being yourself. You're enjoying doing it. You'll find that often the posts that you think will get the least engagement end up getting the most engagement. I don't think there is an algorithm that says this is what people are going to engage with most. And then again, if your market is sales and marketers or recruiters, and you post about recruitment, it's likely that you're going to get a lot of engagement.
Right.
You don't necessarily in the data science world, if we're talking about data science, have a lot of people who sit on LinkedIn all day. Occasionally, they might jump on it once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month. So you might not necessarily get that consistent level of engagement because people just don't use it as often.
Yeah, totally. I there's the other people that are more active on LinkedIn and narrative science are more on the like sales and marketing side. And it's like, dude, you guys are like popping off over there. And it's, there's marketers that spend a ton of time on LinkedIn. There's a ton of likes, and it's like, God bless them. But I totally agree. And one thing I've noticed with my posts is that they, you get the little notification when you get a like, and it's like, that post, I wrote that 3 weeks ago. And it's like, you'll see like one person shows up and then likes like 3 of my posts. And it's like, oh, they came onto LinkedIn for the first time in a month. And it's like, so there's a lot more. It's not like Facebook or, where just things kind of fall off, or Twitter, like it just falls off immediately. It's like, no, LinkedIn, I don't know if its algorithm is different or people's usage patterns are different, but there's a lot more sort of evergreen posts that are just kind of steadily ticking up since I wrote it in August. Every once in a while, a little comment happens or a like or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I think don't put too much thought into that. Just write whatever you want to write. Post it. You're not always going to please everybody. It's not always going to bring lots of value. I'm also a big, this is just me, but I like controversy when it comes to writing posts because people have an opinion. If you have an opinion and then ask for someone else's opinion, typically they'll give it to you if the topic that you're talking about is interesting.
Right. Yeah. And just one more thing on that. Like, I think the more you can sort of see the value for yourself and then if other people like it, that's kind of gravy on top of it. But it really, after you do it for a couple months, it's like, you really do start thinking better. And you start, for me, it feels less, like my thinking has kind of gone from like it was like kind of a soup for a long time where there's a bunch of stuff in there, but it's all kind of like mushed together. And now it's starting to be like, oh, I have like, there's more kind of concrete. It's like a stew, it's like, oh, there's like a chunk of meat and I can sort of talk about that. And there's the piece of potato and like, they're more kind of concrete chunks and sort of repeatable ideas. And I could talk about them in writing and I could talk about them here and I could talk about them in the company. And like, it's just, and that hasn't required anyone to read the post even, there's no engagement for that. It's just, it's a good exercise for me. And so even when a post kind of duds, it's like, well, I learned about myself. I got some more thoughts down. And it's useful even when it doesn't go viral or whatever.
Yeah. I'm pretty selfish with the podcast idea, really. I spotted an opportunity that people perhaps weren't focusing on enough, like touching on topics like this. More so than anything, every time I do one of these, I learn something else. I learn something more. There's part of me that's like, I would love for other people to be tuned in, but in the same breath, I don't really care if they're not. Because I'm coming off this knowing something I didn't know before.
Yeah. I'm coming out energized. Absolutely. And it's like, oh, there's an audience here too. Like, oh, right on. I hope they get something out of it.
Absolutely.
And I know the feeling.
Cool. Well, I think we're closing on the hour, so I wanted to kind of wrap this up and say, look, I really appreciate your time, Nate.
Sure, absolutely.
If there's other topics, which I'm sure there will be over time that we can touch on, let's kind of like chat about those in the back room, so to speak, and then bring them to light on LinkedIn and YouTube. But if anyone that's tuned in wants to follow up and watch this maybe later today or later in the week or the weekend, I'll be posting the links to our YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music channels at the bottom of this feed. And if you've got any questions for me and Nate following this on the particular topic, I'm sure Nate would be okay with it, but just reach out and ask us. We'll be more than happy to help.
Yep, absolutely. I love, as we said, super fun connecting with people. I'd love to keep talking about this stuff with anybody.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks for your time, Nate, and thanks for anyone who tuned in. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lewis.
Cheers.
Take care.